This is the gate of Yahweh, through which the righteous will enter. Thus reads the inscription presiding over the entrance of El Tránsito Synagogue in Toledo, the greatest monument of Spanish Jewish culture. The Sephardic Jewish community reached its splendor in the Middle Ages, before being expelled from the country in 1492. But their presence lingered on for a long time as so-called New Christians, a relevant social element of Spanish cities and towns. This heritage has been preserved in all its radiance in the 24 towns that comprise the Red de Juderías de España, or network of Spanish Jewish towns. When did the Jews arrive on the Iberian Peninsula? It's difficult to ascertain. Although some scholars believe that small Jewish communities may have reached these shores along with Phoenicians and Greeks in the 2nd millennium BC, it's most likely that the first of them arrived with the Romans around the 1st century BC, concurring with the occupation of Palestine. Of all Spanish towns, Toledo is the best representative of the presence of Jewish communities in Roman and Visigothic times. The city of the Primate Cathedral, the Bisagra Gate, and the mighty Alcázar is an extraordinary Christian medieval metropolis with unmistakable Muslim traits and a Hebrew soul. Just 2 monuments as relevant and beautiful as the synagogues of Santa Maria la Blanca and El Tránsito would suffice to bear witness to the incomparable power of the Toledo Aljama, the greatest Jewish quarter of Western Europe. It was mentioned by Al-Harizi in his book Sefer Takemoni. I came to the princely city of Toledo, capital of the kingdom whose garment is the grace of dominion and whose ornament is refined culture, to show the nations and princes its beauty. Its walls encircle many palaces and many synagogues of unparalleled beauty. Surrounding both synagogues, a labyrinth of mysterious narrow alleys shaped the colorful Madinat al-Yahud, the Jewish city, the result of overlapping Jewish settlements that were populated through different periods in time. It's not by chance that El Greco, the painter that best captivates Toledo's charm, lived on the site of the palace of powerful Samuel Halevi, founder of El Tránsito Synagogue and confidant of King Peter I, the Cruel, who became one of the greatest representatives of Sephardic culture ever to be born in or to inhabit Toledo. Roman as well, both in spirit and structure, Calahorra is a secluded, secret city, halfway between its defensive and Kabbalistic past, that preserves the circular pattern of Roman streets in its layout. The inner city is a labyrinth of curved streets and alleys leading nowhere, flanked by humble dwellings such as those used by the Romans and Jews that lived here for more than 5 centuries. An intricate pattern of streets unfolds under the protection of Roman and medieval fortifications, which, breaking the quiet uniformity of the old town, overlook the valleys of the Ebro and Thidacos rivers. It's a space that has been left miraculously intact and oblivious to the dizzying pace of the modern world. At the top, the populous district contrasts with the magnificence of the Calahorra Cathedral, exceptionally built by the river. You can find here and there many references to the Jewish past of Christianity. such as the Jewish Book of Oaths, or the most valuable of them, the famous Calahorra Torah, discovered as the wrapping on some cathedral chapter minutes and considered an example of the persistence of Jewish culture, which refuses to leave a place where it belonged during countless generations. The unmatched beauty of the Mosque of Córdoba conjures up the splendor of the culture of Al-Andalus in the Middle Ages. In its heyday, around the 10th and 11th centuries, it also fostered the development of the so-called Golden Age of Spanish Judaism, when philosophers, scientists, doctors, poets, artists, and great statesmen contributed to the progress of European culture. As captivating as the mosque is the Synagogue of Córdoba. Its courtyard, prayer hall, women's gallery, decoration, and scriptures adorning the temple, located at the heart of the Jewish quarter, are faithful witnesses to the history of a community that is still present there. The great Moshe ben Maimon, mathematician, physicist, astronomer, and philosopher, also known as Moses Maimonides, or Rambam in the Jewish world, is certainly the most prominent figure among the Andalusi Jewish scholars. As the saying goes, from Moses to Moses, there was none other than Moses. In the winding streets of the city of the Caliphs, everything harks back to the way of life of the Córdoba Jews, known for their culture, but also for their lively Jewish quarter, populous, rich, and mercantile. The stories ring with a distant echo in your ears while you plunge into the city, searching for its monumental gems or its excellent gastronomy. The distinctive flavor of Sierra Mágina olive oil welcomes the traveler when arriving in Jaén, an extraordinary urban stronghold presided over by St. Catherine Castle and anchored amidst the vast sea of olive groves of the surrounding province. This city is a crossroads that preserves charming historical streets. And it was the birthplace and residence of Hasdai ibn Shaprut, ambassador and confidant of Caliph Abd al-Rahman III, who contributed to the blooming of the golden age of Judaism in the city. The fascinating, intricate Jewish quarter, immersed in the Middle Ages, is a perfect symbol of the long period of coexistence among Jews, Muslims, and Christians that took place over 12 centuries. The menorah of the diaspora celebrates this coexistence, next to the archaeological remains of Baitha Gate, where the Jews entered and left the city. The footprints of those who walked together can never be erased. Nevertheless, the traces of confrontation after the expulsion in the 15th century also remain in places such as the splendid cathedral by Vandelvira. The Cristo del Amparo niche, for example, as well as the St. Lawrence Arch, the Dominican monastery, and the palace of the Jewish protector, Miguel Lucas de Iranzo. These are two sides of the same coin, still present in Jaén as part of its most authentic and personal atmosphere. Lucena is unique among all the Spanish Jewish cities. Historically known as the Pearl of Sepharad, or the City of the Jews, few communities in Al-Andalus reached such widespread renown. Its cultural splendor was comparable to the Hispanic Hebrew literary circles in Córdoba and Granada during the Caliphate and the Taifa kingdoms. The medieval chronicles described Lucena as the City of the Jews in a period when it was populated almost exclusively by followers of the Mosaic Law. Since it served as a refuge in the 9th century for many people fleeing prosecutions in Córdoba and Granada. A world-class academy of Talmud studies flourished in the city, which attracted many of the best scholars of Sepharad, such as the wise rector Yosef ibn Meir HaLevi ibn Megas, the great Maimonides, and Yehuda HaLevi, better known as the Prince of Hebrew Poetry. The mysterious and evocative history of that Lucena, Eliosana, 100% Jewish, comes to life in every turn. Its houses, synagogues, and Talmudic school were located within the city walls, surrounded by the present-day Plaza Alta y Baja, Las Tiendas, Canalejas, and Las Torres streets, crossing the area of the former St. Clair Monastery and circling around to reach the defensive enclosure back in Plaza Alta y Baja Street. All these spaces, together with the Jewish cemetery, the most extensive in Sepharad, strengthen the feeling of history in Eliosana. The memory cannot be erased from the gravestones of the old Lucena rabbis or from the flickering flames of the famous Lucena oil lamps. These are traces of a slumbering city that comes back to life in many of its squares, districts, and monuments, such as the Moral Castle, the Palace of the Counts of Santa Ana, and the Palace of the Counts of Ust, affording it unique charm. After walking around the city, you can delight in the excellent cuisine of Lucena, which preserves the flavor of the best culinary traditions of the Andalusi Jews. Thanks to its extraordinary past, but also to the warmth of its people, its rich and surprising gastronomy, its flamenco atmosphere, its monumental beauty, and its populous streets and squares, Seville is one of the most charismatic and internationally famous cities in Spain, and rightly so. Some of its most authentic neighborhoods, such as Santa Cruz, Santa Maria la Blanca, and San Bartolomé, are linked to the enormous development of Andalusi culture and magnificently portray the role of the Jews in the relay between Muslims and Christians. Birthplace of great scientists, bankers, poets, and Talmud scholars, Seville also is home to many humble artisans who lived in places such as Dyers or Pepper Streets, which retain the references to the old trades in their name. Many other streets still bear the mark, beauty, and fascination of the different Jewish quarters that replaced each other over the course of the centuries in the city. Legendary passageways evoke old stories, such as the tale of the pretty Susana, the Jewish girl who was in love with a Christian and was not afraid to betray her father for it. She denounced his intrigues against the city guard and, later remorseful, left a will requesting that her head be cut off and displayed in the street that today bears her name. These glimpses of old times allow us to track the deep marks left by the Jewish communities in history. In parallel to the Kingdom of Castile, the Catalonian Jewish quarters, not so deeply intertwined with the Muslim world, also enjoyed long periods of splendor throughout the Middle Ages, thanks to the ongoing contact between the Catalonian aljamas and the great Jewish communities on the Mediterranean. The best example of all was the Jewish quarter in Barcelona, where, according to researchers, there may have been 4,000 Jewish citizens in the 14th century. That is, 10% of the city's population at that time. Some centuries earlier, in the 11th century, Barcelona was a holy community of wise, prudent men and great princes, according to Sephardic traveler Benjamin of Tudela. While the Generalitat Palace, seat of the government of Catalonia, was built over the home of Jewish poet Moshe Natan, the rooms of another Hebrew manor hold the Kal Interpretation Center, a must for successfully navigating the series of streets that make up both Jewish quarters in Barcelona, Kal Major and Kal Menor. You have to be very observant to find evidence of the old town in the present one, such as the niches for the mezuzah, the remains of old Roman dwellings that were later occupied by the Jews, and the inscriptions found in the most unimaginable places, as well as the archaeological remains that have recently been excavated. Just outside the limits of the Jewish quarter, the Royal Palace reminds us that in the Plaza del Rey, the Disputation of Barcelona took place, and it also beckons us to discover the infinite attractions of this city, from the Sagrada Familia to other Gaudí masterpieces, the cathedral, and Montjuïc Mountain, the Mountain of the Jews, where the remains of the medieval Jewish cemetery can be found. Castelló de Empúries, seat of a beautiful, thriving medieval county in the vicinity of the spectacular natural park of Aiguamolls de l'Empordà, can be regarded as a small-scale example of the coexistence system reserved for the Jewish population, who for many years enjoyed the privileges granted by the Counts of Empúries. Over the course of the Middle Ages, Jewish communities were organized in aljamas, legal and administrative entities that had their own leader, or nasi, their own laws, civil and religious courts, and their own judges. It was a society in itself, made up of 300 families that lived according to the Mosaic law, with their houses, their common buildings, and their cemeteries, where the majority of the Hebrew gravestones in the Curia Preso de Castelló Medieval History Museum come from. The relationship between Christians and Jews is captured, if one knows where to look, in the extraordinary St. Mary's Basilica, the best example of the rich religious heritage in Castelló, from the depictions of rabbis in the Passion and Crucifixion scenes of the main chapel to the splendid altarpiece dedicated to St. Michael. Not to mention the funerary stele from the lookout point, or the double baptismal font where around 100 Jews were forced to be baptized in 1417. The charming alleys of the Jewish quarter still retain the structure of the Jewish quarter, which came to its peak in the 13th and 14th centuries. Its heritage remains in the authentic spirit of this village. While it's true that in the Sephardic Alhamas there were influential magnates and important businessmen, most of the Jewish population were artisans living in humble dwellings and neighborhoods, preferably under the shelter of the walls or the castles of their benefactors. That is, working-class districts that were often molded to fit in with the abrupt terrain for defense purposes. One of the best examples of this kind, which has remained virtually unchanged by the passing of the centuries, is certainly the San Antonio de la Quebrada neighborhood in Cáceres, known as the Old Jewish Quarter. This area, where Jews lived for at least 4 centuries under Moorish domination and 2.5 centuries more with the Christians, is full of charm, flowers, and light. Evidence of this can be found in the artifacts discovered in Torre de los Pozos, the modern Stars of David, bearing witness to the Jewish origin of the neighborhood. The magnificent Galartha Palace, where Rabbi Sergius Cohen lived, or the Jewish Quarter Olive Grove, which recreates a tiny Jerusalem in the very heart of the Old Town. In particular, St. Anthony's Chapel still retains the atmosphere and proportions of the old synagogue. The Jewish connection continues along the streets of Cáceres' new Jewish quarter after passing through the Arch of the Star. From here, it intermingles with the rest of this World Heritage City, boasting one of the most picturesque old towns in Spain. In this Extremaduran city, the night always shows its most inviting side. Documentary evidence tells us about how fully developed Tarazona's aljama was during the Middle Ages. Established under the protection of the Moorish fortress, the old Rua conceals a beautifully intricate Jewish quarter, whose inhabitants were all faithful followers of the Mosaic Law. Through narrow alleys and mysterious passageways, the very same legendary streets that inspired the Becker brothers, Gustavo Adolfo and Valeriano, a secluded path runs through the heart of the old Jewish quarter, at the foot of the impressive buildings of the upper town, whence the old Christians spied on the movements of their Jewish neighbors. The old town descends, following the path of history, to the new Jewish quarter, created at the beginning of the 15th century and witness to the tragedy of the expulsion. You must complete this visit to the city by discovering other signs of its splendor over the centuries, such as Charles I's triumphal march frieze on the facade of the town hall and the stately cathedral. These are traces of history that no one has managed to erase, and they will always be part of the mythical, ancient soul of this bimillenary town. Of all the community constructions, bakeries, butchers, baths, hospitals, etc., built by the Jews to duly comply with the law, the most important, beyond doubt, was the synagogue. The Betula synagogue in Tudela, still under research, seems to be a unique exception among the Hebrew temples that are preserved in Spain. Not only due to its meticulous structure, housing a prayer room with long benches and a women's gallery, but also due to the unusual fact that it is housed in the middle of the cathedral cloister. In Tudela, there is a cloth where the surnames of the main converted Jewish families in the city were sewn, which originated a popular Spanish idiom, tirar de la manta, meaning to blow the whistle. You can also admire the portraits and related objects of 3 Jewish notables from the city: Yehuda Halevi, prince of the Andalusi Hebrew poets; Abraham ibn Ezra, one of the most important scholars in Sepharad; and Benjamin of Tudela, whose Sefer Masaot, or travel book, is still considered crucial in understanding how the Jews in the 12th century Mediterranean area lived. A growing sense of the prevalence of Sephardic heritage can be felt along the streets of both historical Jewish quarters in Tudela. The street names of the Old Jewish Quarter pay homage to the most famous figures in the city, and the medieval houses and monuments boast of its Jewish past. The New Jewish Quarter represents the heyday and development of the Jewish community in the 12th century, when the Jews enjoyed the protection of Sancho VI the Wise, King of Navarre. Tudela is an eternal witness to the course of history at the heart of Navarre, a mudéjar gem whose beautiful heritage never ceases to amaze travelers, beckoned by its people to share the good things in life as they are traditionally known to do. Perched above the Fluvià River are the remains of the old Besalú synagogue, a gateway to the past where you will be able to follow the footprints of the Jews in an era when they inhabited this stronghold, which was once the seat of a thriving county in the Middle Ages. However, in Besalú, the most relevant building that illustrates the strict attachment of the community to their traditions was the mikveh, the Jewish ritual bathhouse. Connected to a stream that integrates it with the great flow of the eternal waters and suitable to perform the 3 prescribed immersions, the mikveh, with its exact proportions, was a space of physical and spiritual purification that was used before the Shabbat ceremonies. It was also an exclusive area that provided women with intimacy in the absence of men, where they could meet and carry out the rituals after menstruation and childbirth. From the center of the community, comprising the synagogue and mikveh, you can stroll around Besalú's Jewish quarter to discover vibrant evidence of this essential historical era, from the rebuilt Gate of the Jews to the splendid proportions of the royal court, a building that belonged to Astruc David, a powerful and influential Jew. You can walk through the impressive stone streets of the Jewish quarter and inspiring arcades of Liberty Square, where frequent conflicts between Jews and Christians were solved when the years of tolerance started to draw to a close. Its impressive churches and extraordinary gastronomy will add the finishing touch to a pleasant visit. One of the best ways to approach the past and present of Besalú, located in the Garrocha region, is across its wonderful Romanesque bridge, the true landmark of this stunning village. When speaking about Sephardic traditions, one cannot forget Jewish weddings, such as those enacted every year in the History Festival of Rivadavia. They take place under a wedding canopy, or chuppah, where the rabbi imparts 7 blessings and then shares a glass of wine with the couple. After placing the ring on the bride's hand, pronouncing the words of consecration, and reading the ketubah, or marriage contract, in public, the groom breaks a glass at his feet by stamping on it, symbolizing the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And then, up to 7 days of celebrations may start. Rivadavia is also known for its wine, produced by the Jews in the Bronza area, and for the Jewish sweets that are still being made in the ovens of Herminia's bakery 5 centuries after the Jews were officially expelled from town. All the flavor of Hebrew confectionery has been preserved in her almond treats, date treats, and Star of David-shaped donuts. It's no wonder at all, given that Rivadavia has always stood out for being faithful to traditions and for the resistance of its townspeople to the Inquisition, which is a clear symbol of the traditional Galician commitment to peaceful coexistence, as explained in many texts and artifacts from the Jewish Information Center of Galicia. In this fight between coexistence and intolerance, we find the converted Jew Jerónimo Bautista de Mena, better known as Malcin, who in 1606 furnished a list comprising 200 Rivadavians to the Inquisition. In contrast, the Touza sisters offered shelter in their home to Jews that were persecuted by the Nazis during World War II, before helping them cross the Portuguese border in secret. This town, ideally located amidst green hills and defined by its picturesque streets, squares, and churches, has a lot to offer, such as the delicious Galician cuisine and Ribeira wine. The latter is included in the Sefarad Vineyards project, which has fostered the rebirth of kosher wine production not only in Galicia, but throughout Spain. In the 13th century, the Kabbalah reached the Iberian Peninsula from Provence and Languedoc, and Girona became its main focus of dissemination, thanks to one of the city's most important sons, Moses ben Naaman, better known as Nahmanides, and by his acronym, Ramban. This movement seeks the divine interpretation of the sacred scriptures, and its master from Girona was a distinguished philosopher, Talmudic scholar, poet, doctor, and rabbi, whose essays were translated into several languages and whose works are still studied by the scientific community. Girona's narrow streets, mysterious stairs, and suggestive passageways that make up the Old Town, or Jewish Quarter as it's known, are in fact an extraordinary urban metaphor of the Kabbalah. The Jewish History Museum is located on 8 Forza Street, an old Roman road that is presently the main street in the Old Town and the Jewish Quarter. Here, over the remains of an old synagogue, not only the broader history of the Jews in Catalonia is explained, but also the daily routines of the local community, from the cradle to the grave. The museum displays the most recent archaeological findings, not only from the medieval Jewish Quarter area, but from the mikveh and its adjoining installations. The journey through time continues in other cultural centers, but especially amidst the maze of narrow streets that cleverly adapt to the uneven terrain. It can even go so far as to include a search of Stars of David in the Arab bathhouse, or in the vicinity of the Gironella Tower, where the Jews took refuge during the 1391 massacre, reaching as far as the cathedral, where the Jude from the Creation Tapestry from the 11th century have become a symbol of the Jewish Quarter and the whole city of Girona. In León, the ancient weekly market, celebrated continuously for 10 centuries, is a magnificent illustration of an important activity performed for centuries by the Jewish communities of the Iberian Peninsula. Although many eminent figures were born within its Jewish quarter, like Moses de Leon, author of the Zohar, one of the holy books of Judaism, most of its inhabitants were traders and artisans. Following the destruction in the late 12th century of the Castrum Judeorum in Puente Castro, a few miles from the walled city, the Jewish population of Leon found a new opportunity near the walls of the city, in the space where the famous Barrio Húmedo, or wet quarter, is located today, and they settled down there for 3 centuries. They lived there until they were expelled in the 15th century, as the fresco paintings by Nicolás Francés show in the ambulatory of the León Cathedral, or Pulcra Leonina, erected on top of the foundations of the Legio Septima Gemina, the origin of the city. A secret town where Jewish history can be traced among the silent and narrow streets of the ancient Jewish quarter, or in the squares of the Barrio Húmedo, where visitors can appreciate the excellent wines of this region and a wide selection of food with the best flavors of this land of deep Jewish roots. The procedure for locating cemeteries in the cities of Jewish tradition is always the same. We have to find a way out of the Jewish quarter with access to a river, since rivers separate, in accordance with tradition, the world of the living from that of the dead. On the other bank of the river, we will find the graveyard. In Segovia, it is quite easy to follow the path used by some Jewish people who refused to convert to Christianity and were forced to flee through San Andrés Gate, across the Clamores stream, and to reach the Pinarillo Cemetery, where they found shelter in the caves there. The Roman aqueduct, the cathedral, and the magnificent medieval fortress on top of the bastion over the Eresma River represent, together with its gastronomy, the landmarks of Segovia. This city possesses an incomparable historical heritage made up of countless churches, monasteries, palaces, and residences of the nobility. A thriving Jewish community, with some of its members being prominent citizens, lived here for centuries together with clergymen and nobles, and also with traders who always showed a far more conciliatory spirit. This is the case of Abraham Señor, who was elected by the Catholic monarchs as a symbol of the conversion of the Sephardis after the decree of expulsion of 1492. His palace is now the educational center of the Jewish quarter. The Rabbi Meir Melamed owned the sumptuous palace that now houses the Casa Mudéjar, currently belonging to the Rasgo program. Many restaurants in Segovia offer traditional Sephardic meals that bring you the flavors and the cooking practices of the Middle Ages. These great individuals were the leaders of a Jewish quarter that over time had several synagogues. Some of them were truly astonishing, like the Mayor Synagogue, today the Corpus Christi Church, and others were more modest, like the Ibañez Synagogue in Segovia or the Burgos Synagogue. The Jewish quarter was closed off from 1481 with 7 gates on the south side of the walled city. A significant part of the medieval street layout remains intact, and the medieval atmosphere can be appreciated everywhere. A journey to the past. This is a magical and exciting journey to an old and monumental World Heritage Site, where you will discover a different, intimate, and almost secret side of the city. The trilingual tombstone of Tortosa is one of the oldest and most valuable testimonies of the Jewish presence in Spain. It's engraved in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, and is part of the grave of a young Jewish woman named Meliosa. It dates from the 6th century. The original tombstone is kept in the Cathedral Museum, where the famous Tortosa dispute took place in 1413. The dispute was presided over by Antipope Benedict XIII, Papa Luna in Spanish, and its purpose was to shed light on the theological supremacy of Christianity over Judaism. It was a clear sign that things were changing and that the long period of social harmony was about to end. Around Major de Remolin Street, the layout of the Jewish quarter of Tortosa has remained virtually unaltered since the Middle Ages. For at least 3 centuries, numerous artisans, traders, doctors, and distinguished figures lived in its small houses and narrow streets. In this town, we can find 2 historical Jewish quarters within the walls that protected the population for centuries. From the Zuda Castle, where the Jewish community took refuge during the massacre of 1391, to the Celio Tower, erected by Peter III the Ceremonious to defend the town and the Jews. The giants Kashisha and Bonjour are vestiges of the past that remind us of the connection between this town and Jewish culture, and are used today to restore and spotlight the Jewish quarter. Moreover, important research on documents and archives has been done in the last few years to learn more about this tradition. The city of Avila bears exceptional witness to the controversial relationship between the Catholic monarchs and the Jews. Unable to bear the pressure of the masses against the Jews, and seeking to create a new form of state based on religious uniformity, among other things, they ended up signing the expulsion decree in 1492, which brought a long history of coexistence to an end. However, they took their fate into their own hands and ensured that the Jews left their kingdoms with all due rights and guarantees, given that the Jews had been a royal asset up to then. Famous for its city walls, its Renaissance palaces, and its Romanesque churches, not to mention the lasting impression left by Teresa of Jesus and John of the Cross on the city, both descendants of converted Jewish families, Avila was, and still is, a universal reference in spirituality. A Jerusalem in the heart of Castile, the place where Moses de Leon wrote the Sefer HaZohar, better known as Zohar, or the Book of Splendor, one of the most sacred Jewish scriptures, together with the Torah and Talmud. The legend of the Jew who witnessed around 306 AD the suffering of martyrs Vicente, Sabina, and Cristeta, as recounted in detail in their cenotaph in St. Vincent's Basilica, supports the theory that the Jews may have arrived in Avila during Roman domination, before the Christians. The Jews of Avila lived in several neighborhoods over time, such as in the vicinity of the Cathedral and Reyes Católicos Street, formerly known as Cal de Andrin, where the house of the rabbi is still preserved, as well as Belforad Synagogue, later replaced by Nieves Church. However, they were also forced to confinement for some time in a ghetto in the Santo Domingo area. Further locations linked to the Jewish presence were the tanneries of St. Secundus and the Jewish cemetery, which is close to Encarnacion Monastery. The dark side of the story is present in the atrium of St. Peter's Church, where the judgment over the murder of the La Guardia child took place. In St. Thomas Monastery, where Fray Torquemada ruled over the Spanish Inquisition with an iron grip. And in Sancti Spiritus Church, where a pyre was installed to burn those condemned by the Holy Office. The city is like an open book that evokes at every turn one of the most interesting yet regrettable moments in the history of Castile and the history of Spain. For 6 years, the Jewish quarters of Navarre escaped the decree of expulsion of the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile. Many Jews from both kingdoms sought refuge in Navarre. A city full of elegant palaces, impressive churches, Romanesque bridges, and charming details, Estella Lizarra, the Beautiful, has earned the nickname of Toledo of the North. It's a fascinating town, a milestone on the pilgrim route to Santiago, and an essential enclave between the mountains and the banks of the River Ebro. It reached its peak during the Middle Ages, thanks to the harmonious coexistence of Jews and Christians. This trade-based town had the third most important Jewish quarter of Navarre, after Tudela and Pamplona. Under the shadow of the Zalatambor and Belmecher or Lizarra castles, the Jewish quarter of El Gacena also experienced its maximum glory during those centuries. The Jewish community that had lived here since the founding of the city is represented by the 2 Jewish usurers sculpted on the facade of the Palace of the Navarre Kings, and by the 2 Jews supporting the corbels of the Holy Sepulchre Church, as a symbol of the new religion erected over the old law of Yahweh. These Jewish roots can easily be traced along the Rua de las Tiendas or in the remarkable church of Santa María de Jesús del Castillo, erected exactly on top of the old synagogue. We can also discover the legacy of famous descendants of converted Jews like Fray Diego de Estella, a Franciscan monk of the 16th century and author of fundamental treatises about Christian ascetics and mysticism. This town can be proud of its important past. As the traveler Aymeric Picot wisely stated in the 11th century, Estella is still a town where one can find good bread, excellent wine, lots of meats and fish, and all sort of happiness. After the decree of expulsion was enacted, many Jews decided to stay and convert, or pretend to convert, to Christianity. In the city of Plasencia, there is still much evidence of the persecution of converted Jews. For example, the crosses engraved on walls of houses, indicating that the people living there were Christians. Another clear sign is the presence of fleur-de-lis in the cathedral cloister, a symbol of the power of García Alonso de Covarrubias, protector of the converted bishop Gonzalo de Santa Maria. In the magnificent architectural complex of the new and old cathedrals of Plasencia, the remarkable sculptures by Rodrigo Alemán in the choir stalls show the continuity of Judaism among Christians after 1492. Founded in 1186, ut placeat Deo et hominibus, to please God and men, the noble, loyal, and benevolent city of Plasencia offers a beautiful monumental ensemble in the heart of Extremadura. It's a cultural crossroads where Jewish heritage can be discovered in places like the Plaza Mayor, in which Jews used to organize a street market that has taken place every Tuesday since the Middle Ages. The Jewish past can also be found in the archaeological remains of the old Jewish quarter of La Mota, where the convent of St. Vincent Ferrer now stands, currently a national tourism parador, or in the St. Nicholas Church, in the atrium of which conflicts between Jews and Gentiles were resolved. The Jewish legacy is also preserved in the charming narrow streets of the old and new Jewish quarters. It's still alive in the inns and taverns that continue to cook old Hebraic recipes. It can also be found in the Berrocal Cemetery, where the remains of old anthropomorphic tombs remind us of the deeply rooted Jewish custom of taking the dead to the other side of the river of life. Monforte de Lemos is a clear example of the persistence of Jewish culture long after the enactment of the decree of expulsion by the Catholic monarchs. Located at the heart of the Ribeira Sacra, this town was erected around an old military bastion, symbol of the rule of the Counts of Lemos, who for centuries protected a Jewish community whose members held very important positions in the local administration. The Jewish quarter enjoyed a high degree of social harmony for many centuries.
Monforte de Lemos,
Monforte de Lemos, Monforte dos Demos. 500 inhabitants, 300 thieves, and the rest Jews. The inhabitants of the neighboring town of Sarria liked singing this taunting song, which reflects the abundance of Jews in this magnificent medieval town. Abandoned in the 16th century as a result of the stability provided in this area by the Catholic monarchs, the old Monforte, meaning strong mountain, built on the top of St. Vincent Hill, gradually moved downward towards the banks of the Cabe River and left behind a piece of its own history in which the Jews played a key role. From the cryptic stars in the keep of the Count's Palace to the remains of the old Jewish houses in Falagueira, Zapateria, or Pescaderia streets, everything in Monforte reminds us of its medieval past. The trabuleiros, small desks used by traders to sell their goods in the Middle Ages, are also a symbol of a thriving trading town. Or the residences of the Gaibor, a family of rich converted Jews that was involved in the famous event of the Cristo de los Azotes. Or the splendid scene of the Jewish circumcision of Jesus, sculpted by Francisco de Moure in the Colegio de la Compañía, popularly known as El Escorial of Galicia, due to its huge dimensions. Streets and squares full of authenticity and mystery that lead us to Plaza de España and the group of houses in Abelardo Baanante Street. The whole town is influenced by the spirit of the Ribeira Sacra, a region intimately tied to the friendly character of its wines. In all Spanish cities with Jewish quarters, the lingering of Hebrew culture was a reality for many centuries. In Palma, the Jewish heritage, identified with the Chuetes or Chuetas, descendants of Mallorcan Jews, is still noticeable. This continuity was possible thanks to the existence of a very rich Jewish community during the Middle Ages, which was able to adapt to the ups and downs of history. The beauty and precision of the Catalonian Atlas, attributed to Abraham and Jehudah Cresques, a gift of Prince John to Charles V of France, reflect quite well the important position of the Mallorcan Jews in the 14th century. The Cresques House, located in Boton Street, is one of the many noble residences of the Jews in Cal Major, one of the 2 Jewish quarters of the city where there are still many visible signs of their presence. The stones that currently support the Monte Sion Church are worshipped by Jews from all over the world who want to transcend the barriers of time by touching the foundations of the old synagogue. The Torre del Amor Street evokes the story of Magaluf Natjar, who managed to get an order from the king to force his rival, Mosef Hakim, to reduce the height of his tower so that the latter could not spy on Magaluf's wife, with whom he was in love. In Cal Menor, Jaume II and Argentaria Streets are 2 busy commercial areas reminiscent of medieval souks. There, the Jews first and converted Jews later have done business over the centuries. Some of the most representative stores of this area are the famous Mallorcan button shops. The Black House of the Inquisition, which recalls the worst part of this history, is also located in the main square of Cal Menor. This sad part of history is also linked to the Belver Castle, where Jews and local representatives had to take refuge during the massacre of 1391. Apart from these 2 districts, there is another Jewish area in the city according to the 12th century chronicles, the Almudaina dels Jueus in the Moorish citadel. The wonderful rimonims, or Jewish ritual objects, exhibited in the Cathedral Museum are some of the few exquisite objects that have been kept in perfect condition. The Almudaina Palace, or the St. Dominic Convent, currently the Parliament of the Balearic Islands, and back then a place to exhibit San Benitos imposed by the Inquisition on Judaizers, are 2 milestones along this route that show us the magnificence of the Jewish culture during the Moorish period. But there are still many other things to admire, enjoy, and taste in this city of light with its windows wide open to the Mediterranean Sea. Is certainly the city that best preserves its Jewish tradition within the weave of its current identity. The decree of expulsion issued by Isabella and Ferdinand was in force until the 1869 Constitution provided for freedom of religion. During the 19th and 20th centuries, the cities and towns with a Jewish past consistently endeavored to recover part of this Hebrew tradition. Located in a splendid natural setting amongst gardens, fig trees, and chestnut trees, Hervás is one of the towns that enthusiastically joined the celebration and recognition of its Jewish past. Traditional Hebrew sweets and delicacies are now prepared by new hands that pay tribute to authentic flavors from the past and presently constitute an important activity in the modest but compact Jewish quarter of Hervás. The names of some of its main streets, such as Rabilero, Synagoga or Synagogue, or Amistad Judeo-Cristiana, Jewish-Christian friendship, confirm the willingness of the townsfolk here to maintain the social harmony that was a reality for many centuries. Thanks to the preservation of the old hamlet and its construction details influenced by the terrain, today the streets of this town continue to conjure up a realistic picture of how those Jews lived, behaved, and even felt. These echoes from the past still reverberate, if we pay close attention, in the waters of the Chiquita Fountain or the river Ambroth, where on moonless nights, when the wind blows gently, it's possible to hear Maruja wailing. Her dreaming spirit can still be perceived by those who strive to understand the secret language of water. And hence, we reach the present day. After receiving the prestigious, world-renowned Prince of Asturias Award, Jewish cult filmmaker Woody Allen made Oviedo one of his showcase cities. How can one not fall in love with such a fascinating, captivating, and elegant city? His outdoor statue is a mandatory stop for any tourist visiting the capital of Asturias, where one can also admire the pre-Romanesque jewels of Santa María del Naranco and San Miguel de Lillo churches, as well as the magnificent Campo Amor Theater built on the grounds of the old Jewish graveyard. Oviedo is a lively and dynamic city where visitors can bear witness to its energy in the Fontan Square, the heart of the capital of Asturias and the main gastronomic center of the city. The Torah, the menorah, the chair where the rabbi sits to lead the worship. Everything in the modern synagogue of La Casina, open to all the Jews living in Spain in the 21st century, recalls the presence over the centuries of this social group of enormous importance and influence in the medieval city of Oviedo. In order to learn more about the history of the city, we can visit the statue of the frightful Inquisitor Valdés in the courtyard of the old university, or the Ferrara Bible, an original version of which is kept in the splendid university library. The memory of this community is still alive in Oviedo, as it is in every one of the cities and towns that form the network of Spanish Jewish towns. This is a tribute to that land of milk and honey found by the people who arrived here after crossing seas and mountains in the mists of time. In every town, curious visitors will find a Rasgo Center where they will enjoy a symbolic added value that will bring them closer to the soul of the old Sepharad. Those who saw their children grow in the hourglass of the centuries respected the wisdom of their ancestors and adhered firmly to the laws of Moses. Those who, upon leaving, took their house keys and still secretly dream of coming back. The return to the land of perpetual light, of the holy seed, of the ardent word, of the pure souls at the foot of the tabernacle. The return to eternal Sepharad.